Golf Central on YouTube is brought to you by the new elite family of woods and irons from Callaway.
Right now, we want to bring you the latest from a very important meeting today in D.C. For close to 4 hours at the White House, President Donald Trump met with PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan, player directors Tiger Woods and Adam Scott, and Public Investment Fund Governor Yasir Al-Rumayyan, all to discuss the reunification of the professional game. Now, the PGA Tour released a statement after that meeting today on behalf of Tiger Woods, Adam Scott, and the Commissioner Jay Monahan, saying, "We have just concluded a constructive working session at the White House with President Trump and Yasir Al-Rumayyan. Thanks to the leadership of President Trump, we have initiated a discussion about the reunification of golf. We are committed to moving as quickly as possible and will share additional details as appropriate. We share a passion for the game and the importance of reunification. Most importantly, we all want the best players in the world playing together more often and are committed to doing all we can to deliver that outcome for our fans." I want to welcome in Rex Hoggard, GolfChannel.com senior writer, and our Eamon Lynch. All of us have been following this story for a number of years now. And Rex, there were hints today in this meeting that there was a possibility of an agreement, at least in principle, being done in the White House today. That did not happen. What do you take from this meeting today?
I think as we've learned over the last 2+ years how complicated these negotiations must be. I will say, when you read the comment from the tour, the one thing that stood out to me was the idea, discussions about the reunification of the game. And this goes to the heart of what we've been talking about. I think the financial terms of whatever a possible deal would be between the tour and the Public Investment Fund, that's pretty straightforward. I don't want to dismiss it. I know that's still difficult, but last year's SSG investment in the tour, that's pretty much set the standard. You knew exactly where the bar was. The difficult part now is finding out if you can come to that agreement, what would professional golf look like? Would there be 2 tours under one umbrella? Would you meld it all into one tour? It is clearly a very difficult and complex conversation to have, especially if you have to spend it 4 hours in the White House.
Do you think the substance today was a positive?
In general, yeah. I think there was a lot more anticipation for what was coming. And part of that owes to the comments that we saw recently from Jay Monahan and from Tiger Woods suggesting that breakthroughs are imminent. And this does speak to the complexity of it. But it also, I suppose, raises the question, Donald Trump is clearly determined to hasten the process along. But it's also possible he may actually have complicated it in the sense that the work that has been done previously may now be superseded by what Donald Trump wishes to see and what he thinks he can enforce, because it's very clear the guardrails have moved from one administration to the other. And what the various parties thought might have been possible under the Biden administration's Department of Justice may not match what they think is now possible under the Trump Department of Justice. And so much of it depends on a word that was used twice in that statement, is reunification. And what does that actually mean? Because if you asked people involved in these negotiations 3-4 months ago, they would have told you that might have meant some kind of cross-pollination between tours. It might have meant live players showing up occasionally on the PGA Tour or some kind of team component in there. It's very possible that reunification has now been redefined, and that might actually mean everything under one umbrella, which would never have flown under the last Department of Justice, and it may fly now. So I think what may have been on the table back then might no longer be fit for purpose based on what is potentially on the table now.
Okay, going with that theory you just mentioned, does that slow down this process or speed it up?
I think if you're Donald Trump, you think it's going to speed it up. But there are so many constituencies in play here as to what this is going to look like, and not least of which is the policy board and the transaction subcommittee at the PGA Tour. And that's really the next step that the Tour has. And I know they have a board meeting next week. But if the negotiations have changed, if what the Tour deems possible has changed radically from several months ago, well, then that is going back into the process at the PGA Tour. There's no unilateral decisions being made at the top of the PGA Tour anymore. This is going to go back to the policy board to decide, here's now what is on the table. Are we good with this?
And Rex, you mentioned the fact that you think the financials of this agreement are pretty much set. That's your belief. But there is the complication of cross-pollination. Players who went to live, maybe playing on the PGA Tour. How is that going to, settle with the membership on the PGA Tour? What do you feel like the next steps are in this ongoing negotiation?
Well, as Eamon pointed out, the Policy Board is scheduled to meet on Monday next week in South Florida, and clearly they're going to have a lot to discuss. And that's in the short term. I think in the long term, I was just texting with two players before we came on air in response to today's announcement, one from the PGA Tour, one from LIV Golf. And I was taken by both seem to have the same concerns and the same comments and the same criticisms of what they saw today and with the ongoing negotiations. And it dawned on me that following June 6th in 2023, when the framework agreement was announced, every player felt like they were blindsided. And for the tour to get a deal done, where you at least have some sort of majority of players that agree that a deal needs to be done and this is what it would look like, the players need to be on board. And I think our colleague Brad Faxon just made a great point on the telecast right before we came up to do this report, where he pointed out that has anyone actually gone to the LIV players and asked them what they would like to do? Asked them if they'd like to come back to the tour full time. Ask them if they'd like to just cherry pick certain events. So there's a lot of questions out there, and I think the tour's next move is going to be trying to get the players on board to whatever is happening in the game of golf.
Yeah, what do you feel like the concerns are on the LIV side?
I think by and large, I've probably spoken with a dozen players on the LIV side, and I haven't found one that said they want to come back to the PGA Tour full time. Now, clearly, that could change depending on what happens to LIV Golf. If LIV Golf continues on as it is right now with 14 events and you have a global schedule, it's certainly understandable that players like a Brooks Koepka doesn't want to play 14 events there and come over and play his 15 event minimum or whatever that might be in the future on the PGA Tour. If it becomes something else, if it becomes a circuit that's played on the fringes of the normal PGA Tour season and the tour season is condensed, like we talked about earlier today, you could imagine players could play both. But right now, I don't imagine there's any player that envisions in his mind, maybe outside of Patrick Reed, that yes, I could play 30, 35 events a year. That would be fine.
And we talked about this earlier on Golf Central, the hypotheticals of the possibility of a LIV player playing at the Players, maybe playing in Bay Hill, which is a signature event. Well, LIV, that schedule has events during Bay Hill, during the Players. So, you know, there's a lot of complications and a lot to be worked out. But, Eamon, if you're a fan of the game and you were hoping that this reunification happens, what do we gain from today?
Well, I think to the point Rex just made, you don't hear LIV players talk about their desire to compete again on the PGA Tour because they're not permitted to do that. They're not permitted, contractually not permitted to say anything that might be considered a diminishment of the LIV Tour. So that's why you don't actually hear them say, and you do hear PGA Tour players speak out on this issue. This statement is of a kind which we've seen somewhat frequently now from the PGA Tour, in that there's clearly an awareness that they want to communicate at least some sense of progress towards fans. They're not actually given any detail, but they want the sense that things are happening and they're communicating it. And it's worth pointing out that even though we don't actually get detail, only one party to these conversations has actually made any effort to provide an update at all. The onus falls exclusively on the PGA Tour, because since the day Yasir Al-Rumayyan appeared on CNBC to announce the framework agreement, he has given exactly zero updates on any progress since then. So if people want to, I suppose, complain about the lack of detail, we should also ask, where's the attempt at transparency or accountability on the other side of this table? Because there clearly is no accountability in terms of messaging, and certainly not on finances on the LIV side.
Yeah, that's a great point, too. But, yeah, still, I think if you get all the principals in the White House with the president, this is, I'm considering, not a negative day. This is a positive day. It seems like